bicentennial, we're winding it down.
The Wilson's Bicentennial closing ceremony party is going to be this weekend, Saturday, at the Wilson Boathouse from 6 to 9 p.m. It's going to be free hors d'oeuvres and a cash bar. They're also taking reservations for dinner, if anybody wants to do that, so call the restaurant and make some reservations, but please come down and join us, it should be fun.
And there's also the last of the calendars back there. We're selling them at cost. We only printed 700. There's about 12 left. They're $7. They're good till March. Yeah, they're an 18-month calendar, but they're wrapped. They're nice sealed in a cellophane. So help us get rid of those if you could. So we have a very special guest tonight. Our own Edna Stubbs from Wilson here is here to channel or resurrect an important historical figure from Niagara County history, Belva Lockwood. Some of you may know about it, her name, but by the end, might not, but by the end of the evening you will. And it's keeping with the spirit of the season, Halloween just around the corner. So a little bit about Edna. She was raised in Ellicottville, went to school, high school there, and she went to Fredonia State, got her teaching degree, and taught for a while, but she also had always had an interest in theater. So she taught some in Niagara Falls, and she took a continuing education course at Melody Fair, and that's where she met her husband Dave, and they've been married for 54 years. They've lived in, they were married in 62, I don't know what that adds up to, but they've lived here in Wilson for 54 years. They've raised 2 children, they have 2 grandchildren. Then later on, she went back to school and got her master's at Niagara and did some counseling. And then she moved on to work at the Niagara County Council of Girl Scouts. I guess some of you girls here may know her. That's where she took an interest in Belva Lockwood, and probably one of the most important people that not many people know about here in Niagara County. So she's made it her mission to educate everyone, as many people as she can, about Belva Lockwood. So with that, let's take a trip back to the mid-19th century and try to imagine what life was like for spirited women who dared to question the status quo. I give you Belva Lockwood.
At the Wilson Collegiate Institution. I gave a long speech, about an hour and a half, on the evils of drink and tobacco. I was 18, and it was in October, 170 years ago. Believe me, I'm glad not everybody waited that long to ask me to come back. But I am happy to be here, and I am going to tell you a little bit about myself. And I'm going to start when I was a little girl. I was born in Royalton on Griswold Street, October 24th, 1830. My parents had 5 children. I was the second. I had an older brother, a younger sister, and 2 younger brothers. It was fun living on Griswold Street. No, it wasn't. Believe me, it wasn't. We were the only family on the street. 1840, there were not a lot of people in this area. Lots of trees, not very many people. We had a small farm. And of course, we all had to help on the farm, and I really didn't like much helping on the farm. Any of you people here live on a farm? Yes? You like working on the farm? No, I didn't either. I loved to read. My mother taught me how to read when I was 3. old. And my mother made sure I didn't read those. But by the time I was 11, I had finished the Bible. Every last word of it. And I remembered most of it through my entire life. And I tried to follow what the Bible said a person was supposed to be like. Independent, taking care of themselves, and helping other people all the time. I tried to do that. I really did. But sometimes I got into trouble. My mother had a way of chastising me when I did something wrong. When I was about 6, maybe, because I had started school already, I went to a one-room school just down the road from our house. I had started school, and I knew about the mustard seed in the Bible. Everybody know about that word? If you have enough faith, as big as a mustard seed, and it's a real tiny little seed, if you have that much faith, you can move mountains. And I thought, well, you know, I probably don't have so much faith that I can move a mountain. But maybe I can move the hill out behind our house. So I went out there one Sunday afternoon, after we had gone to church, because I figured I'd have more faith then, and I sat down and I said, "Hill, move over there." And when I opened my eyes, the hill hadn't moved. Now, I couldn't understand that. I thought I had enough faith. I should have been able to move that hill. I should have. And it didn't move, so I went back. And unfortunately, I asked my mother why the hill hadn't moved. And she said, "Belva Ann Bennett, what on earth is the matter with you? You can't move a hill. Women can't do anything like that. Women stay at home and take care of their children. That's all they do." I heard that a lot as I was growing up. Women can't do those things. Girls can't do those things. You think I listened? No. No, I did everything I wanted to do. Well, almost. Sometimes I would have people who told me I couldn't. Usually it was my father. "Belva, you can't do that. Belva, no, you can't do that." But I had a wonderful teacher in the school where I went. His name was Moses Richardson. He was the editor of the Lockport Daily Journal paper. And he also taught school. And he was a wonderful teacher. And besides that, he had a room in his house half as big as this room, and there was nothing in it but books. And he said to me, "Belva, anytime you want to read a book, come to my house and get it, and you can have it." And boy, did I go. Every week I went and got 7 books. And I read them, and then I took them back and got 7 more. And I kept on reading and reading, and I was so excited about learning all of these new things that nobody had ever heard about here in Western New York. They never heard about all the things, all the countries in the world, and all the wonderful things that were going on. It was just great. So I continued on through school, and then I had another little happening when I was about 12. Do you remember a story about St. Peter walking across the water to get to Jesus on the boat. Anybody remember that story? Well, I thought I could walk across the mill pond that was near our house. I had more faith now. I was almost twice as old as when I didn't move that hill, so I decided I was going to try that. So I went out by the mill pond, and unfortunately, again, it was on a Sunday because I figured I was going to have more faith on Sunday. I had my good clothes on, and here I am on the edge of the mill pond, and I said, okay, Belva, walk across the mill pond. You're going to do it. You're going to walk right across on top of the water. 1, 2, 3. Oh. I sunk. I got my best shoes soaking wet, my best dress soaking wet, and I had to go home and tell my mother what I had done. What do you suppose she said to me? Belva Ann Bennett, what is the matter with you? Will you stop with this foolishness about trying to do big things? Women can't. Women don't. Just stop. I listened, but I didn't believe her. I didn't believe it. I thought, I know I can do some special things. I know I'm going to. I continued on with my schooling, and when I was 15, my teacher told me that he couldn't teach me anything else. I knew everything he knew, and I might as well start teaching myself. So I did. I started teaching at 15, just at the school down the road for me. I made $3 a month, and a month at a term was 3 months. So I made $9 for the first term that I taught. The next term, they said, well, we'll give you $4 a month for this term. And then I found out that the gentleman that was teaching 2 roads over was making $10 a term. And I had more students than he did. I had more classes to teach, and I taught more subjects. That just wasn't fair. So I went to the selectman, and I talked to his wife. And I explained to her what was going on. And she said to me, Belva, that's the way things are. You're never going to change it. Right. Well, I didn't think that was just all right. So I went and talked to him. Mistake. He said to me, Belva, women don't need more money. They have somebody. You have your parents to take care of you. That gentleman has a family to take care of. I said, he does not. He's not married. Well, he could have one, he said, and he would have to take care of his family, and you don't. That's the way things are, and you're not going to change it. Under my breath, I said, yes, I will. But not then. I continued teaching for 2 more terms, and I got the princely sum, the raise of $1 a month each time, 4 terms. And then Uriah McNall, who lived in Terry's Corners, came over and asked me to marry him. And my father was ecstatic. He had been telling me for 2 years that I was going to be an old maid, and I needed to find somebody to marry me right away, as quick as I could. And I said, I don't want to get married. I don't really like marriage. I don't really like the way women are treated. You got to get married. So when Uriah came, I said yes. And just before we got married, in October 1848, was when I came and spoke here in Wilson. We were married on November 8th, 1848. I was 18, he was 23. His family owned a sawmill in Terry's Corners. It was on a creek. And the first year that we were married, I got pregnant. And just before our daughter was born, he was hurt at the mill. He lost his leg, and I had to take care of him and our daughter and the sawmill for the next 3 years until he finally passed away. Now, he used to tell me what I should do at the mill, but he was never very clear about it because his mind wasn't quite right because he was in so much pain. And I actually ran that sawmill, but when he passed away, they told me I couldn't. Women couldn't have a business. I was a widow, I would have to sell it. All right, what am I going to do? Go back to teaching, which is what I did. But before I went back to teaching, I went to the Gasport Academy for a year and learned a little bit more so I could teach more subjects. And that was fine, except it wasn't good enough. I didn't want to be just a teacher. I wanted to be something more. I wanted to be in charge of something. I wanted to be in charge of everything, including my life. And now that I was a widow, I was, sort of. In 1854, I entered Genesee Wesleyan Academy and took a course in educational administration. And what was there, I monitored a couple of courses in law at the men's college. I couldn't take them, but I could sit in and listen. And I thought it was the most interesting thing. I graduated in 57, and Lockport Free Academy contacted me and said, will you come and be the preceptress? Doesn't that sound important? Of Lockport Free Academy? And I said, certainly, that sounds wonderful. Then I got there. There was a principal who was a man. I was only the preceptress. Number 2, I was making less than half of the principal of the academy. We had about 500 students. And I was not too happy about that. I stayed until 1861. The Civil War had started. I had been working with the Methodist Church to roll bandages and do anything I could to help. And then I said, I'm going to go somewhere else. Maybe there's a place where women can actually do things. No, not really. Not really. I went to Hornellsville. I was going to teach there, but the school burned down before I got there. And I had to teach in an old building, and that 1 year of that was enough, so I moved on to Owego and had a school there for a few years. But I kept thinking about those law courses that I took. Wouldn't it be great if I could be a lawyer? Then I could really help people. If I was a lawyer, I could really help people. What I decided to do was go to Washington, D.C. I took my daughter with me. She now had completed school as well. And we visited all around the Washington, D.C. area. And we found this big 3 buildings almost in the middle of Washington that no one had ever, they wanted to rent it. But it was one great big hall with meeting rooms. rooms. The second building was a 3-story building, and the other one was another small meeting room. And nobody wanted to try and do anything with it. So I said, Laura, let's rent this. We'll start a school. I'll put the school on the first floor. We'll have our lodgings on the second floor. And on the third floor, we'll board any girls who would like to live with us while they're learning. Does that sound good? My daughter said, sure, that sounds fine. So we rented out the meeting hall for meetings, for talks, whatever. Anybody who wanted to rent it, we would rent it. And we managed to make the rent and even make a little bit of money with the school for a number of years. And then, in 1868, I met Ezekiel Lockwood. He was a dentist, much older, but he believed in me. He knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And he said, Belva, if you want to be a lawyer, you should. You should do what you want to do. So I made the mistake that most women made in my day. I married him. I did. And he helped me try to get into law school. I applied to Washington Law School. They said, we don't take women. And I said, why not? And they said, because you will be a distraction to the young men. I said, I'm almost 50. How am I going to be a distraction to young men? That's ridiculous. Well, it doesn't matter, they said. We don't take women. But there was a new law school starting in Washington, the National Law School. And they needed students. And they took women. 16 of us started the course in 1870. 2 of us finished in 1873, and that was wonderful. And in between starting and finishing, my second daughter was born, Jessie. But she only lived a little bit more than a year. She was very sickly, and I was so unhappy when she passed away, very unhappy. But I was becoming a lawyer, which I had wanted for my whole life, almost, and I was going to be able to help a lot of people, so I was happy as well. And then I got a letter from the school when I graduated. At the top of my class, that said they were not going to be able to give me my diploma because the young men were unhappy about the fact that a woman was first in the class and was going to be a lawyer, and it was just not done. I did something that I had never done before. You see, I knew that President Grant was on the board of directors of that school. I wrote him a letter. I'm going to read it to you because it was a long time ago and I'm not exactly sure. I want you to get it just the way I wrote it. To His Excellency, U.S. Grant, President, USA. Sir, you are, or you are not, President of the National University Law School. If you are its president, I desire to say to you that I have passed through the curriculum of study in this school and am entitled to and demand my diploma. If you are not its president, then I ask that you take your name from its papers and not hold out to the world to be what you are not. Very respectfully, Belva A. Lockwood. A week later, I received my diploma in a plain paper sack. But I had my diploma, and now I was able to practice law. What more could I ask for? Wonderful. I started practicing right away. I had lots of pensioners, old folks who needed help getting their pension or some money or whatever from the government, veterans especially, and I did a lot of work for that. I did a lot of work for women who were victims of domestic violence or had husbands who were I need to put this delicately, not very nice. I helped a lot of women to get a divorce, or to get a separation, or get what they needed for them and their children. And I continued to do that kind of work until I realized that there was a problem. I could not practice before the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. So my husband and I went to the court and asked that I be allowed to practice before the Supreme Court. I had a petition which was about 6 pages long, reasons why I was entitled to practice before the Supreme Court. There's nothing in the Constitution that says women can't practice before the Supreme Court. But they said women cannot practice before the Supreme Court. That was their final decision. No way. If I wanted to practice before the Supreme Court, I would have to have an act of Congress passed to make that happen. All right. We're going to move some mountains, and this time they're going to move. I sent a petition to the Senate, because it had to come from the Senate first and from the House of Representatives. Sent the petition there. It took 3 years. 3 years for it to get through. In the meantime, I'm still helping people with their lawyer problems. And one thing I did that you may not know, but I had Senator Arnell petition that the federal government must pay women and men who are doing the same job the same wage. And it passed through Congress in 1874. So at the federal level, women do get paid. Now they sneak around it a little bit. You know, they say, well, this person does a little bit less, or this woman does a little. But they have to really work hard to get around that law. And it's been on the books for a long time. And I believe most women don't even know it. Finally, in 1879, I went to the Supreme Court with my Act of Congress. It finally passed both houses, took it to the Supreme Court, and said, here I am, Belva Lockwood. I'm here to practice before the Supreme Court. What could they say? They had told me what I needed to do, so I did it. I was with Senator Ryder at the time, and would you believe they asked him if my moral character was good enough to practice before the Supreme Court. writer, he just looked at the justices and he said, "Gentlemen, I have never met a more moral person in my entire life. Yes!" That was it. I now could practice before the Supreme Court. What a wonderful feeling. I actually did move a mountain. A pretty big one. The Congress of the United States, they're pretty hard to move. Even today, they're pretty hard to move. All right. That was fine. Now what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to practice before the Supreme Court. I brought my first case in June of 1879. And then I was able to practice before the Court of Claims as well, the Supreme Court in Washington. They gave me the right because the Supreme Court was the top, so they couldn't say I couldn't practice at the Court of Claims. So here I am. I'm ready to continue with my career. And my daughter, Laura, is with me with my law practice, and we're doing very well. And then I decided I wanted to get involved in the peace movement. I really felt that we were doing the wrong thing in this country, kind of concentrating on settling problems with war and not doing any arbitration, any peace making. That's what Jesus talked about. Peacemaking was the thing you were supposed to do. In the Bible, that's what he said. I decided to join the World Peace Congress. And I spent the next many years of my life going around the world, literally around the world, to Peace Congress meetings, trying to keep the world away from war. I didn't succeed, obviously. We had World War I and others, Spanish-American War. But I tried. That was a mountain that was too big for me to move. But I worked at it, and I kept working. I want you girls to know that when I started teaching in Lockwood, I taught Spanish, French, German, Latin, and Greek. And I spoke all those languages and could read all of them. How many women do you think back in 1850 spoke and read 5 languages? Is anybody here today who speaks and reads 5 languages? I don't. I took French in college, but unfortunately, my French teacher told me I spoke French with a Latin accent because I took 4 years of Latin in high school. Well, it was all right. I learned some more languages as I went through my time. I learned Russian. I learned Hebrew. And I learned to read a little bit of Chinese. And I never took a class in any of them. I taught myself. Sometimes with a little help from someone who spoke those languages, but mostly I taught myself. And you can teach yourself a lot of things if you have the time and if you have the energy. It takes a lot of energy, but you can do it. I loved reading. I told you about that. I love to read books. I kept on reading books. In fact, I kept on writing books. I think I wrote about 30 books in my life. I'm not sure I could keep track of them all. Most of them were just pamphlets. But some of them were a little bit longer. And I wrote articles for newspapers. And I was heavily involved in the women's suffrage movement. Who knows, which one of you girls knows what that is? Women's suffrage. Anybody? Yes.
They made a commandment where women got the same rights as men.
And what was the most important one?
That they got to work and help their families.
Anybody else? What did they get? The right to vote! The right to vote. They started the women's suffrage movement in 1860. And women finally got the right to vote in 1920. Exciting. I knew that it was going to happen though, because I had been working on it all that time with all kinds of women and a few men, not too many, but a few helped us as well. And 2 or 3 of them were actually senators, believe it or not. In 1884, they asked me to run for president. Edna Stubbs and a friend of hers out in California sent me this note. It says, "We just nominated you for President of the United States." And I sent back a wire to say, "Who's we?" And it was the Equal Rights Party. Probably never heard of it. Neither had I. But they nominated me and I ran for president. I traveled all over the United States, giving speeches, telling people about my platform for the presidency, how I was going to do things if I got to be president. Now, what do you think? Did I think I was going to win? No. But I knew I had a chance to talk. Believe me, I like to talk. I have always liked to talk. And this gave me a chance to talk about women's rights. And the most important one being the right to vote and have something to say about the people who run our lives. I did that. I spent a year traveling around the United States. And when the election was over, I didn't win. Surprise. That mountain didn't get moved. It hasn't gotten moved yet, as a matter of fact. But I decided I loved giving all those speeches. That was exhilarating, doing all that speech making. So I signed up with a company who would send me around the world to give speeches. I got paid for them. I took my daughter with me, so I had somebody with me, and it worked out fine. For the next about 8 years, I traveled around the whole world. We went everywhere, Europe, India, all over the world, China, and I gave speeches everywhere I went. Usually in the language of the people there, because I did speak so many languages. People were amazed in other countries. They had never met an American who spoke their language before, most of them. In 1888, they asked me to run again for president. I said, I'll do it one more time. And it was the Equal Rights Party. They asked me to run. I said yes. And this time, I gave even more speeches, and a lot of them in New York State, because that was my home state. I was hoping to get some votes from New York. Unfortunately, what happened in 1888 was I actually did get about 5,000 votes that were actually counted. Usually what they did with a third or fourth party candidate, they didn't even count the ballots. They just threw them in the wastebasket. You never knew whether you got any votes or not. But in a few states, they actually did count them. So I think it was 5,343 votes, which was not bad. For an old lady, no, that's not bad, right? The problem was, it wouldn't go into the congressional record. They said those votes didn't count. So petitioned them to put those votes into the congressional record. They were on record in the states. They were on record in every newspaper around the country. You had better put them in the congressional record. What do you think happened? They didn't. They wouldn't do it. A woman running for president? Are you joking? It was a joke. But I knew how many votes I had gotten, and so did everybody else in the country because it was in every paper in the country. They may have tried to squash it. They may have tried to hide it, but it did not work. After 1888, I spent about the next 10 years working for the Peace Congress again and traveling. I enjoy traveling. It's kind of hard to enjoy traveling when you're going on steam engine trains that are very dirty. You're going on stage coaches or carts. You're going on steamships, which are very dirty. But I did enjoy it, and I always had my daughter with me. It was wonderful. I liked going to new places. I actually went to Oxford for a semester in England when I went there in 1880 for a Peace Congress convention. It's interesting what you can learn when you visit a foreign country and are able to talk to people. It's very exciting and very interesting. Finally, in 1900, I was wearing down a little bit. Getting older, slowing down. But still, I wanted to have one big case before the Supreme Court. And I got it. The Cherokee Indians were suing the government for the fact that they had been moved from Georgia to Oklahoma. And so many of them had died on the Trail of Tears. And I decided to take their case before the Supreme Court. It took a while, but in 1905, I, along with 2 other lawyers, got $5 million from the United States government for the Cherokees who were left. In 1906, $5 million was a lot more than it is now. Doesn't sound like much to you, but it was a lot back then, and that was my big case. I kept working. I kept trying to help people, anybody who needed it. And I found people whom I could help. But finally, on May 17th, 1917, I died. I'm buried in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. And I knew when I passed away that shortly women were going to be able to vote. I knew it. I was right. The law was passed in 1919, and in 1920, enough states had ratified that amendment to the Constitution, and women voted for president in 1920 for the first time. Did I move mountains? A few. Not as many as I wanted to, but I did move a few, and I was thoroughly excited about that. Now, I'm going to step out of character just a little bit and tell you a little bit about me. I graduated from high school in 1956. I wanted to be a lawyer. Can you believe it? Nobody else could believe it either. My guidance counselor said to me, Edna, you're crazy. You would never make it through law school. You wouldn't. The men would eat you for dinner. They would destroy you. They don't want women in the law. Go to Fredonia, become a teacher. So I did. That's what I did. I went to Fredonia, I became a teacher, and in 1984, I found out about Belva Lockwood. And I said to myself, what an idiot you were. If she could become a lawyer in 1873, you could have become a lawyer in 1962. Well, I didn't. I didn't do it. I was scared. I didn't have as much energy. Well, maybe as much energy. But I didn't have as much confidence in myself as she did. I didn't believe I could do it. So I didn't. But you girls, listen to me. You can do whatever you want to do. You can. And you young men can too. Whatever you want to do, work at it, work for it, and do it. Because Belva would tell you, you can move mountains. Okay, that's enough. If anybody has any questions, I'd be willing to answer them. No? Yes?
What happened to Mr. Lockwood?
He died just before she became involved in getting into the Supreme Court. He did help her a little bit. He actually went before the Supreme Court and said that his wife should be there, but it didn't do any good either. They listened to some men, not others. Yes.
What about your daughter? What did she go on to do?
She stayed with me her whole life. She did get married. She married DeForest Orms, and she had a grandson. His name was the same, DeForest Orms, and he lived in Niagara Falls for a while. It's kind of interesting. Laura died in 1884. So she was a young woman in her 40s when she died. And Belva was 86 when she passed away. She had more energy than anybody else. If you read her biography, you go, well, oh, how could she do all that? I don't know how, but she's a wonderful model for any woman as far as I'm concerned. And I wish more people knew about her. What's his name on public television needs to do a story about Belva Lockwood, like he did about Susan B. Anthony. He does. He needs to do that. I wrote him a letter. I may have to write him another one.
With all due respect.
Yes. With all due respect, you need to do this. Anybody else? Any questions? Yes.
What countries did Belva visit?
Oh my goodness, she visited every country in Europe, including Russia. She visited India. She visited China. She received an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Syracuse University, which combined with Genesee Wesleyan, where she went to school. So Syracuse University says she's an alumnus. And she received that a few days after she got back from a trip to Bermuda to give a speech. She went everywhere. Amazing. I don't think she ever went to Japan, and she never went to Australia. But I did. Yes.
Do you think she ever imagined that prohibition would have gone into effect in 1918 since she had died just before that?
No. No, she had no clue. She gave a lot of speeches on temperance and intemperance all throughout her life. That was one of the subjects that she liked to talk about. And one of the funniest things is, which I just discovered in rereading her autobiography, that she took a lot of patent medicines. Everybody did in the 1800s. And of course, you know what patent medicines are, mostly alcohol. And they called her a hypocrite because she took patent medicines. But she said, I'm temperate with my use. Thank you so much for inviting me. Poster board in the back with some pictures from her autobiographies and some little tidbits. I didn't mention the foot race that she ran down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington with a couple of other lawyers, and she had a very acrimonious time with Grover Cleveland. They were both from Western New York, but he passed a law. She liked to ride a bicycle around Washington because she didn't like to take carriages. And he passed a law that women could not ride bicycles. So she had a bicycle maker make her a tricycle, and she rode it, move about, or go around it, right?